Hello from the Yarn Closet in Tucson, Arizona. Today's podcast is going to be a quick talk about loom knitting. I have some free patterns on my Patreon page, The Yarn Closet, over on Patreon. There are many other free tutorials online. And people like Marley Bird, who will actually walk you through patterns, reading the pattern, doing the pattern. So I wanted to give you some basics. Okay, what you're going to notice here is that there are different kinds of looms. Some of you may recall this. Some of you may have had a little tube with some nails on the top. Might have looked like a lady. This is for making I-cords. You can make small I-cords or larger I-cords. Okay. Some people also can use, this side to make flowers. You just wrap your yarn and then you tie it in the middle. You take it off carefully and you've got a flower. So this is for I-cords, or this side is for a flower. Now, on any of these looms, you can make an I-cord by using just 3 to 5 pegs. There's instructions in one of my patterns that I believe I already have set up for a free download. It is a dog leash pattern. Okay, so you can do an I-cord if you just have one loom of some kind. Now, these are round looms. This peg here usually indicates where you start. It's like your beginning of round. And it is a little helpful to hold your yarn as you're wrapping, because, let me just move aside and grab some yarn. All right, of course the yarn that I grab is tangly yarn. You can use any kind of yarn when it comes to loom knitting. The thing that determines the gauge of the loom is the space between the pegs. You see the vast difference in space between the pegs? This is for ultra chunky yarn. Basics of loom knitting. This is your tail. And this is your working yarn. Check out front, please, or in her bedroom. Okay. When you wrap, do you see how there's different ways to wrap? You wrap your yarn and you do it somewhat loosely. But you do it so that you have a line behind. Okay. There are so many different kinds of stitches. I'm just showing you this as a really basic. Okay. So I've wrapped this loom twice, and if I want to make a basic E-wrap stitch, because it looked like a cursive E when I was wrapping, or some people just call it a wrap stitch, because cursive is not a big deal in the world anymore, that's all you do. It makes something like a knit stitch, but there is a way to mimic a knit stitch better. And this is why loom knitting is so popular, because most of the looms have grooves so that you can find this. They're very tactile, they're very sturdy, you're not going to break most of them. Okay, so I have one little row wrapped and stitched off. Then I just wrap again. bottom over the top. I mean, that really is why loom knitting is so simple. This is going to be wonky. There's a way to do a better salvaged edge, just like in knitting. So this is called a round loom. This is called an I-cord loom or flower loom. This is just a super chunky loom, okay? And even though it looks like a square, the round loom or the square is still going to produce a flat tube of knitting if you knit it continuously, like knitting in the round, okay? The actual shape of the loom is not determining the shape of your knitting. You're shaping your knitting with the same kind of increases, decreases, patterning that you would in regular knitting. This is an adjustable. And see how close these are? This is actually closer than that blue one. This is an adjustable sock loom. So I can count the stitches, each peg is a stitch, and I can come up with the right size for whoever I'm doing. And there you go. There is a ridge in here because it's so small and because this top is metal and flat like this. I just don't love these. These are slippier. But it does work. You can absolutely do short rows. You can do heel shaping. It's all doable. This is a long loom, okay? There's pegs on both ends. So you can do a long tube, or if I start at this peg and I wrap all the way around, including this end, to here and stop, and then wrap backwards, I'm going to make a blanket. A single thickness blanket. The other thing you can do with anything that has two sides, if you do not use these middle pegs on the side, is you can wrap back and forth and make a double thick fabric. Oftentimes you can look it up by the term knitting board. Knitting boards are two sides. So it's a double, you're going to get a double thick fabric using a knitting board, which is going back and forth on the two sides. I like these long looms because you can pick and choose how many stitches you have. They come in various lengths. And then here's the other trick. See this? These two are broken. If you've got spare pegs, you can dig these out, put in new pegs. Sometimes they just go in. Some people glue them in. I don't like to glue them in because then it makes it harder if you do break one. But here's the deal. This is still totally functional to knit a flat piece, starting here, going all the way around to here, even if I can't ever replace these. And I believe I do have replacements. You know, you can also make a hat if you've got a knitting board. Just know that when you transfer from this stitch to this stitch and you're trying to make a circle, that the spacing between these two is going to be wider. So it's going to look like you've kind of missed a stitch. Some people, when they are done with a hat knit on a knitting board like this, will go through in that spot with a crochet hook and they'll finish the stitch. Just like you'd repair in regular knitting. The reason that I like using this and doing that sometimes, or just letting it go, is seed stitch is very easy to recreate on a knitting loom that has an uneven number of pegs. Oops, hold on. This is seed stitch worked on a round loom with an uneven number of pegs. See? Knits and purls, knits and purls. And it's very easy because you're just knitting, purling, and you're going around. So this is a hat that I made years ago. I just did a gathered top. I didn't do any decreases. I didn't do any fancy cuff. There are many ways to bind off. There are many ways to cast on, just like regular knitting. My mom does prefer this because I have little children. It's hard to do this and not have them mess around with my stuff. About 15 years ago, I did a lot of workshops with kids. I think it's a good thing to get them working at because it gives them that same calmness that we get, but they get a more consistent fabric. One thing also to note is that when you're working on your loom, you have to think about the gauge, the space between the pegs. Okay. Then how much thickness you want to get the kind of fabric you want. If you want a loose fabric, you use a worsted weight on a wider set apart space for gauge, or you can use a thicker weight, or you can do 2 strands as one, just like we would in regular knitting. But here I have this knitting board, and this knitting board is about 18 inches long. The piece I am going to get from it, if I knit from one end all the way to the other and back again, and I'm going to try to get just a rectangular piece of knitting from it, the piece is not going to be 18 inches long. As you knit a flat piece, you will see after a while the fabric comes down on the inside and it will pull in, and you'll see how many stitches you kind of lose with a certain stitch and a certain yarn.
Can I show them?
Come here. Guess what we did on our first Corona day? It's a lollipop holder. And that's Choya?
Yes.
Okay, this is Choya. This is a bush from the desert.
I think I know what you should name this video. Corona episode 1.
But we had that one yesterday.
Corona episode 2. Shh. Corona episode 2?
Maybe.
Let's put it right here.
So we do hope that our extra little videos and talks and chats are entertaining for you throughout this Corona experience. I also wanted to show you the hook. This is a more ergonomic hook. It's large. There are smaller ones, just like crochet hooks, but it's a pick. I often use a crochet tool when I am binding off because I find it faster and easier, and I like the edge that it gives. It's very similar to, so I do like a slip stitch edge. If you have no skill with any of that, there are tutorials you can watch and they'll show you how to do it just with the hook. So realistically, one long 18-inch knitting board, a hook, and some yarn, and YouTube will get you started on a number of different projects. You can often find these in thrift stores, and like I said, if they are broken and you believe you can get the little broken bits out, you can go online and you can buy replacements. I've had people make little wooden peg replacements. I can feel that this is coming up. Or sometimes when you buy them at the thrift store, one of the things I did when I got a number of these is I went through on a broken one and I just took the pegs out to use as replacements. So here's another hook. And like I said, it's just different. You can buy special hooks from KB on Amazon, on their website, sometimes at Joann's, that have 2 hooks. It's a large handle with 2 hooks so that you can flip over 2 at a time. But you can honestly mimic anything with one of these and some patience and some skill. There are far more books out there on knitting looms, knitting boards. So this is another way to be creative. It might be another way to engage your kids while everybody's home. But we do hope you are having a fun week. And look with your heart first.